Okay, welcome back everybody. Here's our second video for induction. In our last video we discussed the structure of the document-based lessons and today I'm going to be discussing different ways to modify the documents within a documents-based lesson. In our first face-to-face session, which is going to be October 25th, we'll talk more about the planning process and how modifying documents fits into that process. But today we're really going to focus on the documents themselves because this is one of the biggest challenges that teachers face with their students. So my objective is to cover ways you can modify a document to fit the needs of all of your students, including your English language learners, students with learning disabilities, gifted learners, and your general education population. Sometimes you might modify documents for a specific group of students. Other times, you're going to be modifying for the entire class. So for specific students, what this would look like is that different students in your class would have different versions. So you might have a highly modified document for one group, a midway modified document for another group, and then another document that's not modified very much at all. When you modify for the whole class, the entire class will have the same document, and sometimes you might find that the documents on the website are already modified enough for your kids, so sometimes you might not even need to modify at all. That decision is going to be up to you as a teacher, and we'll discuss making that decision a little bit more in our first meeting, but I just wanted you to keep that in the back of your head. So the first step is really reading through the lesson cover to cover and deciding where you want students to go and what you want them to be able to know and do at the end of the lesson. You have to have a goal in mind before you begin to modify the lesson, so you might want to think about what skills you want students to practice within that particular lesson, as well as what essential concepts you want them to walk away with. This is going to be where you think about your curriculum framework and what content you want students to walk out with. And once you've identified this, you can start making decisions about how to modify the documents. All of the documents that are on the SHEG website, as well as the document-based assessments that are on the staff communities page, have already been modified somewhat already. So when we talk about modifying the documents, you might be modifying them even more because your kids need some more support, or if you are trying to create your own DBL and you need to modify the original documents. The last point is make sure that the documents that you have are pointing kids to the central historical question. So whatever you're modifying, make sure it's getting them to a point where they can talk and discuss the answer to the central historical question. So as you're modifying, there's 3 key areas that you should be focusing on. First, focusing students' attention. Length does not equal quality in terms of the documents that you'll be giving your kids. If kids can practice a skill and pull out the necessary content in a paragraph, then feel free to shorten the document. You don't need to have them reading 5-page documents every class period. Choose excerpts that are going to guide them in answering the central historical question, and a good rule of thumb is to limit it to no more than 300 words. Next, you might think about simplifying the language in the documents. The goal here is to make it accessible for kids. We want them to be able to comprehend the information so that they can apply historical thinking skills. So making the language less complicated and conventionalizing the mechanics is going to help get your kids there faster. You might also want to provide word banks for students if there's a really tricky word that you still want them to know. But my comment here would be to be judicious about this. If there's a word that they need to know in the future, keep it. Add it to the word bank. But if it's a word that's really not going to impact their academic vocabulary, feel free to change it. A good example is this word torrents, which is in a document from the Loyalist SHEG. It's not a word that I think my kids would need to know in the future, so instead of tripping them up, I decided to take it out and change it to streams, I think is what I chose, or I could have chosen floods. So make those decisions when you can. Again, the goal is to get kids to understand the documents, so feel free to change words when you can. The last area I want to discuss in terms of modifying is the presentation of the document itself. And this is a really easy one. Kids get overwhelmed when there's a lot of small text on a page, so use large font, at least 14 points, and give kids the wide margins, lots of white space to write and ask questions. It's a really simple strategy, but it makes a big difference in terms of how kids take in the documents. So there's some additional ways to modify the lesson plan that can help make the documents more accessible as well. You might change the instructional plans, meaning that you might have kids read document C before they read document A, and this is going to depend on your goal and what type of background knowledge you want kids to have, or you already know they're coming in with. Along with this, you might change, or you might add or subtract documents. So if there's a document you think will help kids better understand the central historical question, you might add that in. This is really true of secondary sources. If you think your kids need some background information, so you can add those documents in. You can give it as a homework assignment, or even as a warm-up, or just stick it into the lesson plan itself. The same thing goes for taking out documents. If you don't feel like it's necessary for your kids to read that particular document to understand the content or the central historical question, feel free to take it out. You might also give your kids some additional scaffolds, such as graphic organizers, to aid in their reading comprehension. You could add assessments to provide some comprehension checks. So if you think your kids might struggle with a particular document, you might add in a little assessment to check their comprehension before they move on. And we'll talk about all of this in our first face-to-face meeting. Again, those lesson plans are meant to be modified, so feel free to do that. If you need me to convert any of them into Word form for you, just let me know. And then for higher level students, you can also modify the original documents. Those are on the SHEG website, so if you feel like kids are ready for that extra challenge, feel free to do that. The other place to think about providing support is in the source note and the head note. The source note is always going to be at the bottom of the document. This is where kids are going to look for information to help them evaluate the reliability of the source. You could add in information here about the author to help kids understand the reliability and how to source it a little bit better. You could also add in information about the author's perspective if you think they might struggle in identifying bias. You can also add in information to the head note. This is going to be at the top of the document. This is where I would add in information to help my kids understand the historical context of the time period if they lack some of that necessary background knowledge. So modifying documents for me was a game changer in helping my kids get engaged in the lessons more. Most of the resistance that I was facing is when I was giving a document that was way too difficult and they were feeling really overwhelmed. In our first face-to-face meeting, we'll talk a little bit more about how to collaborate on modifying these documents so it's less overwhelming for you guys as the teachers. And after you watch this video, I'm going to show you an example of a modified document so you can see some of the differences in the original versus the modified version, as well as some of the reasons on why I made those changes. Before the next session, you'll be reading a document from one of the SHEG lessons. I'll have you read it, annotate it, and modify it so that you have it to bring to our first face-to-face so you can compare with some grade level peers. And I'll be following up with you guys probably within the next week or so about what documents those are going to be. If you have any questions about modifying documents, feel free to reach out to me. I have no problem answering specific questions, but other than that, have a great day.